Alright you guys, Riley and Kaylin back here talking about multiplying and dividing integers. So really important when we're talking about integers. When you're adding and subtracting, the rules are totally different and you have to combine the numbers first to figure out if the signs are positive or negative for your final answer. When we're multiplying and dividing, you can actually figure out the sign first before you actually do the arithmetic and figure out what the numbers are. So let's first talk about multiplication. Okay, so if I earn $100 a day, okay, so in one day, if I earn $100, I have $100. Okay, if I want to figure out how much I earn in 3 days, I could either add $100 3 times, and I could get $300, or I could multiply. I could say there's 3 of these. I'm going to multiply 3 by $100, and I'm going to get $300. Okay, so multiplication is repeat addition. Okay, so let's say I'm going to change this up. And I'm going to say instead of earning $100, I'm going to spend $100 for 3 days. Okay, so if I spend $100 for 3 days, that means after 3 days, I'm down negative $300. So let me move this over a little bit. So 3 times negative 100 should be the same thing as negative 100 plus negative 100 plus a negative 100, which we already determined is negative 300. So Riley, 3 times negative 100 should be negative 300. So from this example here, I can see that positive times negative equals a negative. Okay, so using repeat addition, I can come up with that rule. But what's going to happen when I have a negative times a negative? I don't really know what that means in terms of days because I don't know what negative days are. So it's really hard to come up with an example where it's a negative times a negative. So I'm going to offer an explanation that's not very mathematical, but it might help you remember the rules for multiplying and dividing with integers. So here they are. Okay, so when I think about multiplication, I think about couples. Okay, and there are 2 things that couples usually do. Okay, and couples usually agree, or couples are going to disagree. Disagree. Okay, and when I talk about agree, I mean the signs. Okay, so when we multiply or divide, my numbers are going to fall into these 2 categories. The signs are either going to agree or the signs are going to disagree. We just did an example where we just did positive 3 times negative 100, and we got a negative 300. Okay, so when the signs disagree, that's an example where we got a negative number. That's always going to be the case. Signs disagree, always going to give you negative. When the signs agree, so if I have a negative times a negative, or a positive times a positive, that's always going to give me a positive, okay? So if I have like a negative 3 times a negative 100, or a positive 3 times a positive 100, it's always going to give me a positive answer. So unlike the rules for addition and subtraction, when you're doing multiplication and division, you're going to decide on the sign first. So decide on sign first. Okay? So no matter what your numbers are, signs agree, positive. Signs disagree, negative. Always going to be the case, doesn't matter what your numbers are. Okay? This could have been a negative 3 times a positive 100. No matter what, it's always going to be a negative number. Okay? So there's one more thing that we can talk about with multiplication and division, because we're not always going to be multiplying with just 2 numbers. and that is what happens when I have more than two numbers. Okay, and these rules work for multiplication and with division. Okay, so let's put some examples up here. So if I have -2 times -6, my signs agree, so that's going to be positive. I have -2 times +6, my signs disagree, that one's negative, that one's positive, so I'm going to get a -12. Okay? If I have a +2 times a -6, signs disagree, -12. Okay, so I promised you examples with more than two numbers, so let's do that. So I'm going to erase these numbers. Okay, I'm going to erase this x, and let's use parentheses to show multiplication, because you might see an x or you might see parentheses. So I'm going to put parentheses around these. We'll change up some numbers. And 2. Alright, so there's one more trick, okay? And that is when you're doing multiplication division, if you have more than two negatives, you can count the number of negatives, and the number of negatives is going to let you know if it's positive or negative. So here's the rule. So 1, 2, 3. If you have an odd number of negatives, so odd number of negatives, your answer is going to be negative. Okay? So if your negatives don't have a pair, if they don't get to be coupled with anybody, it makes them sad. Okay? It's going to be negative. So figure out your sign first. We know it's negative. Then do the math. 2 times 6 is 12. Times 1 is 12. Okay? So the other way you can do it, here's a couple, same signs agree, positive, positive times a negative, disagree, negative. So you can do this using the rule we just did, or you can just count the number of negatives. Okay? The next one, I have 1 negative, that's an odd number of negatives, or you could look at it, it doesn't have a pair, or different signs, they disagree, it's negative, so I'm going to figure out my sign first, and then do the math. 2 times 6 is 12. Okay, and then the last one, let's put one more negative, just to make it different. Alright, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on, I know you're excited about math. Okay, so the last one, if I have an even, alright, you ready? Alright, so the last one, I have an even number of negatives. So if you have an even number of negatives, opposite of being an odd number, your answer is going to be positive. Okay, so it's a positive number. 2 times 6 is 12, times 1 is 12, times 2 is 24. Okay, so those are your rules for multiplication division. So count the number of negatives. If it's odd, it's negative. If it's positive, it's going to be positive. Okay? If you're only multiplying with two integers, if the signs agree, positive. If the signs disagree, negative. I hope that also helped, and in the next video we're going to talk about what to do when you have integers and exponents.